This is Ian Cameron for thesportsgeek.com, ready to take a look at CFL DraftKings for Week 8. Let's start by looking at quarterbacks for this week. Mike Riley, as he often has this season, topping the salary list at $11,000. I do expect him to play well against a Montreal defense that's really struggled to step up in class against the better offenses in the CFL so far this season. I do think he'll play well this week at home against the Alouettes. Bo Levi Mitchell, $10,600, probably will have a good game, especially because the Rider fans have riled up Bo Levi Mitchell just a little bit after he made some interesting comments that the Riders sort of bending the CFL rules in terms of the amount of time they're spending on practices and preparation time, and that sort of angered Rider fans who kind of snapped back at Bo Levi Mitchell. So Bo Levi Mitchell could be a motivated quarterback this week. I'm staying away from Collaros. Zach Collaros returning for the Hamilton Ticats at quarterback, but he's 9,700. He's facing a good BC defense, and Zach Collaros, when he is right, he is one of the best quarterbacks in the CFL. The problem is, it's his first game in almost a year. There's just no telling how good he is going to be in his first game back. That remains a concern, and again, you're not paying a bargain by any stretch of the imagination to have Collaros. The quarterbacks that I would look toward this week for sure in my lineups, Jonathan Jennings, definitely worth a consideration, 9,200. Has continued to play well week in and week out. 19.7 DK points last game against Montreal. Played well. 331 passing yards, 22.9 DK points for the season, including 8 touchdowns. He's a good consideration. I think the best value on the quarterback board this week, though, you got to go way down on the board. Look toward Matt Nichols, 7,300 for Winnipeg. Kevin Glenn, 7,200 for Montreal. The Montreal offense is starting to come together a little bit, playing a little bit better, facing an Edmonton secondary that is still very leaky, still very susceptible. I think Kevin Glenn's a decent option. And then you go even lower than that. Logan Kilgore at $6,800, expected to be the starting quarterback once again for the Argos. His numbers weren't great by any stretch in his debut, but they were solid. 25 of 42, 322 yards. 1 touchdown, did have the 2 interceptions, but he still put up 17.9 DK points. The thing that's interesting about Kilgore for this game against Winnipeg, Toronto's coming off a bye, and they have a strong track record of playing very well offensively and getting their quarterbacks very well prepared to play coming off the bye week. It really wouldn't surprise me to see more of the same here, so I think Logan Kilgore is the ultimate value option. $6,800 is all he is on DraftKings at the quarterback spot. That's your value pick if I had to make one this week. Matt Nichols again, 70 with the way he's playing, 7,300. That's a great price for a quarterback that's put up 30 points in back-to-back games for his Winnipeg offense. And again, Kevin Glenn against an Edmonton defense that's suspect, worth a look too. So those are the 3 that really stand out from a value standpoint. Glenn, Nichols, and Kilgore a little bit lower on the quarterback depth charts here for DraftKings this week. Running backs, Jerome Messam, the clear choice, 7,500. I can't argue with that. He's the top priced running back this week, but he has just been so solid. He just ran through that Saskatchewan defense late in the game last week. Probably a solid option. I think Andrew Harris is getting more comfortable, 7,400. I'd consider him as well. Going deep down in the running back charts this week, when you look at it, not a whole lot that stands out. Pretty top heavy. If I had to choose in running backs this week, I would stick with the top options. Messam, good option. John White, a solid option. Andrew Harris, a good option. Really wouldn't go deeper into the depth charts than that in terms of running backs this week. At wide receiver, there's some interesting options this week. I think the Winnipeg receivers, for as low priced as they are, because you've got a bunch of guys that are filling in for other players right now on this Winnipeg depth chart, it's a situation where I really believe Winnipeg's receivers this week are vastly underrated. Thomas Mayo at 5,000. I think is probably a decent candidate. Look at 21.4 DK points for him and a touchdown last week against Hamilton. Very solid performance. That's a great output for a guy that you only have to pay $5,000 for. So I think that's an option. Clarence Denmark at 5,200 for Winnipeg, a decent option as well. How about this Chris Davis guy? If you really want to go deep into the list. Chris Adams, rather, for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. He had a couple receptions last week. He is way down the list, 3,000. But if you're looking for a guy that you want to go top heavy on quarterbacks, you want to go top heavy on receivers, you could maybe slip in a Chris Adams at 3,000 if you're strapped in terms of your salary, and maybe get him in and get some decent production for that price. Because let's be honest, Winnipeg, without Darvin Adams, Weston Dressler, and Ryan Smith, they're going way deep into their receiving depth chart. And a lot of these guys played well last week against Hamilton, even though they were just getting their first chances to start at wide receiver. So I think there's tons of value this week with Winnipeg receivers. I'm probably going to be looking at Naaman Roosevelt once again for Saskatchewan. He's been a weekly consideration for me with the Saskatchewan offense. I don't think you can argue with Kenny Shaw as well for Toronto at 6,300. I think there could be some points in the Winnipeg-Toronto game scored by both teams. Kenny Shaw, to me, 25.7 DK points in his last game against Ottawa, which was also Logan Kilgore's first start at quarterback with the Toronto Argonauts. So they instantly gained some rapport and got some chemistry going between Kilgore and Kenny Shaw at wide receiver. I think he's probably worth an insertion in a lineup this week at $6,300. So those are the main options that stand out to me wide receiver wise. For DST, not so much stands out to me here because the Ticats have a tough matchup. As good as their defense has been, they got a tough matchup against BC and Jonathan Jennings, who continues to get better week in and week out. I love the Lions defense, but a little leery about Zach Collaros returning for Hamilton. Can BC handle him? If there's one defense that might be able to keep Zach Collaros neutralized in his return to the field, maybe it's BC, but still, I don't want to go against maybe a big performance from Zach Collaros. He is that good, and Hamilton's going to get an emotional lift from having their leader at quarterback on the field once again. I know Stampeder's the highest priced defense, but to me, they're probably the one I'd have to go with because Saskatchewan's defense has struggled. Montreal's defense, I don't trust them against Edmonton, nor do I trust Edmonton's defense against Montreal. The Argos and Blue Bombers, middle of the pack DST options. I like what I'm seeing from Logan Kilgore, and I like what I'm seeing from Matt Nichols, so I'm not bullish on either of those defenses. So to me, by default, by process of elimination, you're left with Calgary, and I think 5,300. If I had to play one standout DST option over the rest, Calgary's probably the way I'd go this week at 5,300. All right, that's my look at DraftKings for CFL Week 8. As always, I'm Ian Cameron for thesportsgeek.com. Good luck with your CFL lineups this week, and we'll be back next week for Week 9 action.